Welcome to the Warships Podcast with your host, Kellorn, Venacera, and Arun.
Hello and welcome to episode 106 of the Warships Podcast. I'm your host, Kellorn, and today it's just me and Arun as we navigate the murky depths of World of Warships news. Our first topic this week is the new format Ranked Sprint. With 10 ranks, bonus stars, limited stars needed to rank up, and two-man divisions, Ranked Sprint at Tier 5 with 6-on-6 has been a totally new experience. An experience that I, frankly, enjoyed more than any previous ranked season so far. Yes, the rewards were limited, but I was actually having fun in my games in Ranked, which has not been the case previously, as it tends to be in the regular ranked seasons. I don't know if tryhard's the word, but it's much more adversarial. Arun, I know that you had some issues with Ranked Sprint, particularly with the division play, but I guess what did you not care for about this Ranked Sprint season, and have you gotten a chance to try it very much of it?
Well, I ranked out, and I don't think I have ever had an experience in this game that has made me... Actually, no, not even in this game. I don't think I have ever played a video game before where a singular type of thing I've done in that game has made me want to quit that game as much as this Ranked Sprint season has. I did not enjoy it at all, really, because...
I find it interesting because you and I have had such different experiences with it. Like, you know, you seem to enjoy the regular ranked seasons quite a bit, but I've often struggled with, you know, the motivation to keep playing regular ranked seasons, whereas we're completely opposite here on this Ranked Sprint.
Yeah, I get that. I don't really know why. Well, I do know one reason why. For example, I think for me, Ranked is so nice to play because, first of all, players are better there. Because when you get to the higher ranks, there will be some filtering out of worse players, at least, you know, by the time I get there. And this means that players will play better in those ranks. I noticed this really well. Like, I don't really notice it when I play ranked itself, but when I go from ranked to random battles, it becomes really, really noticeable because people really play for objectives in ranked battles, whereas in randoms, it's kind of, well, random. And the other thing is that ranked is solo play, which means that if I queue up, there's never going to be a moment where I press the tap button and I go, oh, there's an Omni division on the enemy team. Well, I guess I'm not going to have much fun this match. That's like one of those things. And this season allows divisions, which means that those divisions can still ruin my day. And it kind of removes one of the most important parts about Ranked for me.
I guess maybe I was one of the divisions that was ruining people's day, because I spent I got to rank 5 on my own, but after I got to rank 5, I mainly played divisions with one exception, with my clan ZR, and you know, most of the people in ZR, especially the 2 or 3 people that I played with in Divis, you know, were pretty good. So we were able to control matches, you know, with just the 2 ships. So you know, that was part of the actual root of the fun that I was having, is that I got to do that and be like, okay, I feel like I'm going to win before I even start because, you know, I have a good person to back me up. Whereas when I play ranked, I often I don't know the people, or if I do know them, it's often because they are people that I don't want on my team because I've had them on my team previously in previous ranked battles.
That's really interesting. So basically, I don't like divisions for the same reason you like divisions in ranked. So I think, well, my problem is that this isn't actually really why I didn't have fun. The reasons why I didn't have fun are different. The reasons I gave is what I don't like conceptually, because I understand that it makes the game a lot less fun for the players that are going to be only playing solo and perhaps aren't very good, because the issue is if you run into a division and say a division of players that are average like 60% win rate. Well, the average player is going to be 50% win rate, but now there's 2 60% win rate players on the enemy team, whereas your team probably does not have them, which means that you're pretty much going to be at a disadvantage from the start. However, from what I understand, if there are divisions, then the divisions are matched up. So there will be a division on one team and a division on the other team. But of course, the problem there is that what's the chance that the division, that your division is going to be better? Basically, what I'm trying to say is that good players can kind of game the matchmaking system this way. If they division up with somebody else that's really, really good, then they have an overwhelming or a disproportionate chance to win because they simply bring far more skill to the table than what the average is going to be on the enemy team.
Right, but that's also one of my main frustrations with ranked is that you come into a game and you've got, that one guy that says, I'm going to go over here and do what I want because I don't want to listen to the team and I don't want to be a team player. That one guy can ruin your match. Whereas if I'm grouped with with Personator, who was one of the guys I was doing ranked battles with, before we got into the match, he said, I'm going to play Cesare. And I said, okay, well, I'm not going to play a second battleship. And I said, okay, I'm going to play Gremyashki. So I played Gremyashki and he has Cesare, and we were able to support each other and complement each other. And, it just worked out the way we wanted it to. Whereas, I feel like if I have to drop into an unknown where I've got 6, in a regular ranked season, I've got 6 guys that I don't know anything about before I push the button against 7 guys I don't know anything about. And my ability to do anything is very limited. And the lack of control drives me crazy.
Yeah, but look at the probabilities, right? What's the chance? Is the chance that the opposing team will have 7 bad players is higher than your team getting 6 bad players? Sorry, no, that's not true. The probability that the opposing team has a bad player is higher on the enemy team than on your team because you are on your team. Unless you're the bad player, then it's 100%. But you get what I mean, right? And
I agree. I'm just saying that like the amount of control that I can exert over the match by myself is less. And that is what frustrates me.
But now imagine you're playing in your division, but imagine if you were on the enemy team. How would you feel playing against that?
I'd probably feel pretty crummy. And I get it. I realize this is a bias towards the way I like to play. I realize that, everyone. But that doesn't make it didn't make it unfun for me to play this ranked season. And I think part of it was the stakes were so much lower. Like I didn't have to grind 100 games. I think I played 15, to get out of the season. Whereas in a regular ranked season, I'm playing 100, 150 games, at the outside. And that's just it's a huge grind. Whereas this was refreshing. It was like, I played a couple games. I got a couple ranks, I ranked out. I didn't really have to worry about it too much. The kind of the light and fluffiness of it was appealing to me beyond just the format.
Well, I think that the number of games is probably one of the reasons why I didn't enjoy this season. So the main reason why I personally didn't enjoy the season was that I probably played badly, and I had some
Wait. The reason that you didn't enjoy it is because you didn't get to strangers before he ranked out to be your buddy.
Well, no.
I'm just giving you crap.
No, I understand what you mean. I just meant that I think even with strangers, it wouldn't have been that much better because I think I probably played poorly. Or maybe I got really unlucky. It's really hard to tell on yourself, But I definitely did get unlucky at least a few times. And I think the reason why the season was not as enjoyable for me is that I didn't play right at the start, first of all. And by the time I did, basically, I would argue that I would find the same players in those ranked games that I had as I would find in random battles. I'm talking like I'll go into a match. I look up I'm playing a destroyer. There are CVs on both sides, so of course it's going to be annoying. I look up the stats of my carrier because it seems that he's doing some really weird things, and he's like 45% win rate. Would you see this in like a regular ranked season in the final bracket? Probably not.
In the final bracket, no, I agree, but. I mean, the other thing is that it shuffled so many people through playing games that it never felt like the upper bracket, quote unquote, for this ranked season felt like an upper bracket.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. So basically, it didn't like filter out people. So, which meant that it wasn't really any different in terms of skill than random battles. So people played about the same for objectives as actually maybe they played slightly better for objectives than in random battles, but it wasn't quite the same as I saw in the other ranked seasons that I've played. Now I do agree though that it was less frustrating in terms of the fact that you didn't need as many games. So if I got unlucky, it didn't annoy me as much as some other people seem to get annoyed in normal ranked seasons. But
there is something I do want to talk about in terms of this ranked season, Arun, is that there were a lot of premium ships, and specifically the two that I mentioned earlier that Personator and I played, Cesare and Gremyashki, and then the third one would be Kamikaze. All three of those ships, to one degree or another, are not as available to the population at large. Cesare is still available, I believe, for purchase, but Gremyashki has been out of the shop for ages. Kamikaze has been out of the shop for ages. Those two are never going to be sold again. You can get them in things like the Christmas crates, but other than that, you cannot get those two ships, yet they are disproportionately powerful in a tier 5 ranked season.
I just wanted to pivot to that point as well and complain about that. I think that's a huge problem. This is probably the biggest issue, actually, this ranked season had, because, well, other than the fact that it's tier 5, which meant you had very limited skill availability in terms of like what ships could do. But the ships, some of the premium ships like Giulio, Gremyashi, and the Minakaze clones, the Fujin, the Kamikaze, those were way too good for compared to the other ships. Here's an example. I'll check the numbers just now. So a Gremyashi has 4 guns. She fires 12 shells a minute, and she deals 1900 HE damage per shell hit. That's 91,200 HE DPM. That might not seem very much, but consider the fact that it's a destroyer, so you can use your 10% skill, right, on it. So you get to 100,000 DPM. Furutaka's DPM, which is a cruiser at the same tier, is 80,000. And I think Kirov is like 91,000, which means that your Gremyashi outputs more damage than some of the cruisers at that tier. Not all of them. I think the Königsberg is better, but still.
The Emil is better too.
It's a destroyer. It also has, stealth torpedo capabilities. It's not, the best at all the other things. It's not very stealthy compared to the Kamikaze. But
honestly,
still.
the biggest problem with it was the AP. Like, I Citadel cruisers all day long with Gremyashki. Like, I went one-on-one with a Kirov and Citadel'd him to death before he could even get in range to shoot me.
Well, come on, that's a Kirov. She doesn't have any armor.
Well, I mean, that's fair, but but you can do it to the Emil, you can do it to the Königsberg. I don't think you can do it to the Furutaka, but that's the only one.
Oh,
you can certainly Citadel Omahas and the Omaha clones.
Yeah, and I think that's a big issue because there is nothing comparable to the Gremyashi that players can get right now. So if you didn't have a Gremyashi, that door was closed for you. Now, probably the bigger issue was actually the Kamikaze though. So for the Kamikaze, the problem is that, for example, on the World of Warships numbers website, if you look at on the EU server, the top 4 ships are Kamikaze, Kamikaze R, Fujin, and Gremyashi. They're basically all neck and neck. And if you look at all the other regions, you'll find pretty much the same results. If you guys don't know, Kamikaze, Kamikaze R, and Fujin are all the same ship, basically. They are kind of like Minakaze. They're like Minakaze used to be. So they are very stealthy. They get down to 5.4 kilometer concealment. They have 7 kilometer torpedoes that are really fast. I think they're like 68 knots or something crazy like that. And the torpedoes are also fairly stealthy and they deal a fairly large amount of damage. Their guns are pretty mediocre, but you can still use them. And the ship is fast, gets up to like 39 knots without the flag and speed booster, something along those lines, and is really, really maneuverable. So the destroyer is really, really good at, doing destroyer things. And so...
Well, it's really, really good at stealth torping and capping.
Yes, exactly.
It's not so good at fighting other destroyers.
Yeah,
But yes, I agree.
It's tier 5, so unless you're running into either a Nicholas or a Gremiashi, it doesn't really matter because, well, you'll get some help anyway, right? And because you outspot all the other destroyers, you're more or less okay. And so those destroyers are super good. And actually, if you look at the EU, the 5th ship on that list is Giulio Cesare, which means that these are all premiums that you can't get anymore. And so this is a problem to anybody that's playing that don't have these ships because they simply don't have access to the most powerful ships in this ranked season. Also, surprisingly, the next ship in line seems to more or less be the Furutaka, which I can actually understand. The Furutaka she doesn't output a lot of damage, but she has some incredible armor, and she has the best torpedoes at that tier. She has 10-kilometer torpedoes, unlike, I think, any other ship at that tier. And unlike normal Japanese cruisers, she can actually launch them at decent angles. And her armor scheme is also kind of weird, so unless you show broadside, you're not going to get Citadel, because even though a battleship can overmatch your bow, the Citadel sits so far back that it's probably not going to hit the Citadel, or at least not at a point where it can actually deal the damage. And so the Furutaka is incredibly tanky, and she can torpedo well. However, she's still a cruiser, and since there is no radar, destroyers don't have to be afraid of them. So the cruiser just ends up being perma-spotted, basically.
Well, I did check. EU, you cannot buy a Cesare. I'm checking NA right now. You can't buy a Cesare on NA either. So you're right. None of those ships are available, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. Where does the OK Hotnik stack up? I didn't see a lot of those, but I did see a couple of them being used very, very effectively because of just how many torps they can throw out and how many guns they have.
Okhotnik seemed to more or less be in the middle-ish area, but I think that depends on the server and how much they're used. I didn't really think Okhotniks were that great because the ship is massive, and if you can outspot that ship, then a battleship is going to be like, okay, I'm going to deal with her, and that's goodbye.
Well, that's actually a really good segue into our big topic for today, and that's the super test change to large caliber shells interacting with destroyers. Namely, all shells over 280 millimeters will be limited to 10% damage on destroyers, essentially all shells to overpenetrate. Or essentially forcing all shells to overpenetrate. I actually have a major beef with this. They state that this is intended to force players to be more aware of their shell type when playing a battleship, yet battleship players are already dealing with a 30-second reload on average. There are some that are a little less and some that are a little more. But I feel like this is taking away the possibility of battleships defending themselves against destroyers that pop out of stealth at extremely short ranges or out from behind islands. And the fact that there's no counterplay if they make this change will lead to frustration. And the point I'm trying to make here is that play and counterplay are, I think, essential in a game, especially in World of Warships. That's part of the reason why radar is so frustrating to people, is that if somebody pops the radar, there's no counterplay that the destroyer can do other than get out of range. Like there's nothing that they can do. That's what's going to happen here. If you force battleships to only overpenetrate, yes, they will still be able to do a decent amount of damage to destroyers. And if you're at, say, 10 or 15 kilometers, and you're shooting at a destroyer and you hit them and you only overpenetrate, that I don't have a problem with. My problem is when you have destroyers that are charging you as a battleship and there is nothing you can do to defend yourself. That's my problem. So I guess, Aaron, what is your thought here about the forcing only overpenetrations on shells over 280 millimeters?
I don't really... Well, first of all, are they going to fix the bug with the overpenetrations? Because...
I don't know.
Because if
that's all the information.
Because if they don't fix that, I don't think that's actually going to make a very big difference. Because sometimes it seems that if you hit the destroyer with an AP shell, you get the overpenetration ribbon, but you deal more damage than you would get from a normal penetration. Perhaps it simply shows the wrong ribbon and it adds an overpenetration with a penetration. But I mean, it would still deal quite significant amounts of damage. I have to agree with you on that aspect that I think AP on a destroyer, I don't really like the idea that it's going to be forced over penetrations because, well, at higher tiers, if a destroyer rushes a battleship, the battleship only gets, I think, 2 shots off before the destroyer can literally sail up next to your side and then torpedo you. And there is absolutely nothing you can do at that point as a battleship to survive that. So you have to be able to sink that destroyer before. And the problem is that HE just isn't very effective against destroyers as a battleship. Because, I'm sorry, but dispersion means that you're going to miss quite many of those shells when a destroyer is heading towards you, even if they're very close range. And even the ones that do hit, maybe you hit the torpedo launcher and do no damage. That isn't very helpful. Well, actually, it would be helpful for surviving, but it's not helpful for killing the destroyer. So I do have some problems with that, and I'm kind of torn. On the one hand, I really hate it when I'm in a destroyer and I'm like 12 kilometers away from a battleship and I get hit for like 12,000 damage. On the other hand, if I'm the battleship and the destroyer is rushing up to me, or I'm trying to chase a destroyer or something along those lines, I want to be able to deal damage to that ship. And it's very difficult if we are going to be forced into over penetrations only.
So I guess does this need some kind of range gate? I mean, if if there's a destroyer under 10 kilometers, should you be able to get full penetration damage?
Well, I think no still. While it might be annoying, I mean, think about it. If you fire at a target that's 12 kilometers away and you somehow manage to get a lucky hit for a lot of damage, the chance of that happening is very low. And I think those are the types of situations where players might really enjoy themselves. It's kind of like hitting a Yamato for 5 citadels. It's one of those, yes, that's amazing types of moments. And I think that might be something that players do want to have. For example, so we actually played in King of the Sea this weekend, and one of our battleships managed to hit the enemy destroyer quite near the start for 15,000 damage. And I think that basically made his evening, with that hit, or at least made the match enjoyable for him. And I think other players are going to experience something similar. It just really sucks when you're on the receiving end.
I guess that's the point, is that, the driver behind this change is not the battleship's players saying we're doing too much damage to destroyer. The driver behind this change is the destroyer's players saying that battleship is doing too much damage to me. So, but I don't think that we should favor one over the other per se. So what does that leave us with? Yes, I play a lot of battleships, yet I also play destroyers, and I make conscious effort not to put myself in situations where a battleship is going to do 15,000 damage to me at 15 kilometers. So, do we reward players that are playing destroyers poorly by making them take less damage than they would have otherwise? At the same time, we disincentivize battleships from shooting at destroyers at all, which there's already a certain portion of the battleship community that doesn't. So what does that leave us with?
I think it's going to be very annoying if battleships don't fire at destroyers, because while people say, oh, cruisers are the counter to destroyers, I don't really think that's true. I mean, some cruisers are. I think Stalingrad is probably excellent at it. But for the most part, the issue is that if you spot the destroyer nowadays, it's often with radar. And if it's radar, then the destroyer is 9 to 10 or maybe 11 kilometers away or something like that. And frankly, most radar cruisers are not very good at hitting destroyers at that range because the shell travel time is so long. Instead, battleships will shoot at them. But if battleships stop shooting at those destroyers and shoot at something else because they can't deal a whole bunch of damage to the DD, well, that means that destroyers are going to have much more survivable time if they try to keep themselves safe. And I think that's going to annoy other players quite a lot, because if there's a saturation of destroyers, then that means there will be many, many, many more torpedoes. I remember back in the day when people complained about torpedo soup. While I didn't think that was the case, people might have those same complaints again. I think the issue is rather with vision than the actual damage, because as I mentioned, if a destroyer is actually rushing at you, they enter like 6 kilometers from you, at that point, you need to be able to deal a massive amount of damage. And if you can spot a destroyer that's simply sailing in a straight line at 12 kilometers, and you manage to hit that destroyer, I think you should be rewarded for that. On the other hand, the problem most is the fact that if a destroyer is actively dodging at like 12 kilometers and you still hit for massive damage, that's frustrating for the DD. But how are you spotting that DD at 12 kilometers? Well, maybe there's a radar cruiser that's like 2 kilometers in front of you and is radaring. So that would be the problem, really, in my opinion, at least. Or maybe there are planes spotting that destroyer. I think that's where the issue is. We simply see destroyers from too far away, from a distance where destroyers just can't do anything.
So there's a couple things I want to bring up in response to that. Is they've already said they're going to implement a limit on the number of destroyers, so to have 4 per side unless it goes to the queue gets too long. They've been talking about an anti-radar consumable, presumably chaff or something along those lines, and the CV rework is going to make carrier spotting significantly less. Not it's not going to be go away, but it's not going to be as prevalent. One carrier is not going to be able to spot the whole map. So is that enough, in your opinion, to not do this AP change for battleships?
I don't quite know. It depends on how chaff works, really. I think so. My biggest issue with playing destroyers, is the fact that you have to risk your ship, because you have to be the one that goes into the cap zone. If you don't, your team is going to complain like no tomorrow. So you have to take that risk. But the problem is that it's not a very rewarding risk to take. And not only are you at risk for being radared and then shot, you're also at risk for taking random torpedoes. You can minimize it, but you can never make sure that that can't happen to you. And I think these two make destroyer play risky, and because of that lack of consistency, it can be quite annoying. So it depends on how chaff ends up working. If chaff ends up working in a way where you can minimize that kind of risk, it's kind of okay. But I would actually think that the CV rework might actually make destroyer spotting worse for the average player. Because while in the past, what happens is that the CV comes around, they spot you and they try to drop on you or something like that. They spend like 30 seconds to maybe a minute around you. But right now, because of the multiple drops, that CV is going to buzz around your destroyer for like 2 minutes at a minimum, really, which means that you're going to be lit up for the entire enemy team for all of that time. So I don't think the vision changes are really enough in that sense.
So I also saw a proposal the other day about the radar consumable only providing a location on the minimap for players, but only lighting you up in the game if you're within a certain range of that ship, if you're within the radar range of that ship or something. This was intended to allow people to see where ships are, but not have one ship that's way far ahead radaring and then everybody being able to see that ship perfectly. Is that something that might affect the vision that you're talking about? And do you think that that's a good idea or a poor idea, or where are you at with something along those lines?
I think it's a great idea. I would like the same thing to happen to CV spotting. So if you're within a certain range, the CV can spot targets for you, say 8 kilometers. But if you're further, or maybe it depends on the type of ship. So 8 kilometers for destroyers, 10 kilometers for cruisers, 12 for battleships, or something like that, right? And I think this would work well for CV spotting as well. This way, the carrier buzzing over your head for 2 minutes won't get you killed every single time or make you completely ineffective for that amount of time. So I do think if changes like that were made, yeah, we probably should not have this AP penetration change for large caliber shells against DDs.
Fair enough. Well, I think that I didn't think about it in terms of the vision control that you were talking about. So I did like that you brought that up. I was thinking of it more in terms of just the frustration of play and counterplay element. So I think that you're right. I think that there's a lot more than just how shells are interacting with destroyers.
Besides, nowadays we have so much HP on some of those destroyers too. I mean, Harugumo gets up to 29,000 HP. So even if you...
Well, I'm also worried about Khabarovsk.
Yeah, Khabarovsk too, right. But speaking of that...
if you can't penetrate Khabarovsk, people are going to be in for a bad time.
Yeah, and speaking of that, in the last ranked season, not the current one, I managed to hit the Khabarovsk from 23 or 24 kilometers as a Yamato. It was glorious.
I'm sure you ruined his day.
No, I think his day was already ruined.
The devblog also gave us a couple of things in regards to standardization this week. Namely, Concealment Expert will be standardized to 10% for all ship classes, and Hydroacoustic Search will be standardized based on tier for range and duration, with the exception of British DDs and Cossack. I sort of get why Wargaming would want to standardize these things in the game to make things simpler, as we have a lot of complex systems and exceptions all over the place. But do standardizations help the game, or do they oversimplify things, Aaron?
In this case, I don't think the standardization is mostly about simplifying or making it more complex. I think it has more to do with balance, and I like both of these changes. Well, actually, I don't fully know what the Hydro change is going to specifically do, but with the Concealment Expert change, I do like that a lot, because it means that cruisers aren't going to be nearly as stealthy anymore, but even more than that, battleships aren't going to be as stealthy anymore. And I think that's always a good thing, because right now, if you really think about it, then if you have a fairly stealthy battleship, say a Conqueror, then the battleship actually has an advantage against cruisers with, when they fight one another, if they are, like, say, 12 kilometers apart, because a battleship fires once every 30 seconds. And this means that the battleship fires, now she's spotted for 20 seconds, but then the last 10 seconds, she isn't spotted, she goes dark, and the cruiser, can't really do anything about it. Meanwhile, the cruiser will probably be firing the entire time, which means that the cruiser is spotted during that entire 30 seconds. So it ends up a situation where actually the battleship has the advantage in terms of stealth when they fight one another because of the long reload. And I think the reason this change is good is that battleships right now get a bigger bonus from Concealment Expert than cruisers do, and standardizing it makes it more equal.
There's a couple things that I want to get back to that, but I did want to read what the hydroacoustic thing is going to be, so that you can talk about it a little bit. It says that standard hydroacoustic search consumable at tier 4 to tier 7, the acquisition range of ships and torpedoes will be 4 kilometers and 3 kilometers, respectively. At tier 8 to tier 10, it will be 5 and 3.5, and the duration of 100 seconds. There will be an enhanced version for German ships that gives them a little bit more range, essentially just up tiers them a little bit. So it does sound like the German ships are going to keep their enhanced hydro, which was something I was a little worried about, because that's kind of part of the identity of the German ships. But they're taking away it looks like they're taking away the tier distinctions and having like a low tier, a mid tier, and a high tier type of hydroacoustic. Speaking
of that, isn't that actually a buff to the German destroyers? Because it says right here that it's tier 4 to tier 7 is 5.5 kilometers ship detection. I don't think that the current German destroyers have that kind of or hydro detection at those tiers.
I'm pretty sure at the tier 4, tier 5 range, yeah, you're right.
No, I mean even higher. I'm not even certain that tier 8 has that right now. And it says right here that tier 8 and 9 are going to also be 6 kilometers, which is going to be great, because I do like this standardization, because if you think about it, destroyer concealment stays more or less in similar, values, right? Sure, it changes, but you get better skills and whatnot, and you still end up at near the 6 kilometer range. I think like tier 7 is where you can have slightly higher concealment, but mostly it'll be like 5.5 to 6.5 is decent concealment. And Hydro being so much weaker at the lower tiers makes the ships just play differently. So I think this kind of standardization is going to be very good for German destroyers. For other ships, I can't really say, because while I do understand that they change a little bit, I have never felt that it was really impactful specifically whether one tier had like 300 or 400 meters more or less hydro detectability on ships, because you already had to be very close to the ship anyway.
I do think that you're right that it is going to affect the way that the German destroyers play. The high tier the German destroyers really do rely on the fact that they have that hydro to kind of keep them safe and because of their poor concealment. So I think that the big change is going to be like to that low and mid tier, and that it's kind of setting you up to play more like the high tier destroyers do, which, unifying the line, I think is kind of an overall good thing. But kind of getting back to the concealment, we talked about, you talked about the fact that battleships are going to be a little less concealable. I don't think that the battleships are so much the issues in that case, though I do think that you're right that any of concealment nerf to Conqueror is probably a good thing. My bigger concern is some of the cruisers that have been balanced because of the fact that they have a radar consumable that has a very nearly equal radius to their concealment radius. So do you need to go back? And so I'm talking about ships like the Cleveland and this new ship that we've been testing, Wichita. They're very dependent on the fact that they are really, those ranges are very, very tight, and that, if you're spotted, you can radar, and that's like one of the main strengths of those ships. So do those ships need to be going back and retweaked so that post the concealment expert change that they still have the same concealment range? Or do you think that those ships should be nerfed?
I think they should be probably tweaked. I would definitely put the Des Moines in the same category, because I think the few 100-meter difference is good enough, because it means the destroyer will spot the cruiser before the cruiser can radar. So there is a chance that if the destroyer angled properly, if they knew more or less where the cruiser was, they would be able to still turn away before radar could catch them. And I think this kind of a delicate balance needs to be preserved, because it'll just be, I think, better that way. In fact, I think all the cruisers should probably get adjusted concealment range. The few 100 meters that is going to be different compared to what it is now to what it's going to be, because I don't think this concealment thing was really too strong on cruisers.
I don't either, and that was kind of why, I even as a battleship player, and yes, I'm going to lose some of my concealment range on my Yamato and other ships like that, those ships were a little overpowered in terms of their concealment. I still think that the same type of play is going to be there. You're still going to be able to go dark if you play it correctly. It's just you have a little bit less room to work with. And I'm okay with that. They do need something in that range. But I don't think that the cruisers, I think, are the real issue here. And I haven't seen anything about cruisers being retweaked. So if cruisers already have a vision problem, you talked about it with battleships, but they also have a vision problem with destroyers. They're supposed to hunt destroyers, but if they have a vision issue if they don't have the consumables to do it. So I think that this needs to be looked at in terms of, are the cruisers in a good enough spot that them lose, because they're going to lose 4%, because it's 14% for cruisers, right? So they're going to go from 14% to 10%, and battleships go from 16% to 10%, correct?
Isn't it 2%? Isn't it 10, 12, 14, and 16 for carriers?
Yeah, you may be right. I can pull it up and take a look, but I still think that the cruisers are the issue, right?
It is. I just checked them in game right now.
Okay, so they're going to, battleships are going to go from 14% to 10%, and cruisers are going to go from 12 to 10. But that 2% for the cruisers means a lot more than the 4% for the battleships, in my opinion.
I think so too. I do hope that they adjust cruiser concealment levels to basically be the same as they are right now.
Yeah, we'll just kind of have to see how that all pans out. They're talking about it in terms of concealment expert being, it's not concealment expert. It's actually the concealment. It's upgrade, Aaron? Am I right?
Yes, it's an upgrade.
There we go. I just wanted to be sure. So the concealment, this is actually the concealment upgrade and not the concealment expert, correct?
Wait, it is? Wait, are you sure? Because the upgrade has always been standardized. The upgrade has always been 10%. And when we tested on the CV rework, that one actually had concealment expert. Was 10% on everything.
You're right. It's concealment expert. So this is really a change in when it comes to captain skills. So I don't know. I still don't know that even if it's 10%, I still think that there's nothing better to take than concealment expert at that tier for most ships. Like even only 10% for a battleship, it's still worth taking.
Yep, I think so too. But I wanted to mention on the hydroacoustic search part. So I just checked in game. The Z46 has a 5 kilometer hydroacoustic search range for ships. It's going to have 6 kilometer, which is going to be equal to what the Z52 right now has, and the tier 8 one is going to also have equal to the Z52. But that's insane. But what's actually even more actually that is insane because the Z46 has less concealment. I think fairly certain. Let me check. Yeah, the Z46 is like 5.7 kilometer concealment, so you're going to be able to.
So the Z46 is going to be stealth.
Yes.
Be able to stealth Hydra.
I
don't know how I feel about
I remember this. I remember when we initially tested the German destroyers. I actually liked the Z46 more than the Z52, and I don't mean because of the tier difference, but straight up, I thought the Z46 was stronger because I think they had similar or the same hydro, and so the Z46 actually ended up performing slightly better because Z52 had a much worse concealment.
Well, I think the Z20, what is it? Z28? The
23.
The 23. That's going to be a heck of a lot better ship too if it gets, because it's going to get a 6 kilometer hydro.
Yeah.
That's insane because it's already got, it's even less. It's what, 5.5 kilometers detection? 5.7?
I don't know. Let me see. Okay, it's 7.9 base. So it'll end up being, it'll be 6.2. So that's not nearly as bad.
Okay, so it's really just the Z46
yes.
That's going to be the one that's overpowered. So
yes. But maybe, that's to make up for the fact that ships at tier 10 now have legendary upgrades and stuff. So who knows? But actually, there's one other thing. It says that hydroacoustic search consumable at tier 4 to 7, the acquisition range of ships and torpedoes will be 5.5 kilometers and 3.75 kilometers for torpedoes. But the tier 4 and 5 destroyers in the German line don't actually have hydroacoustic search right now. Does that mean that they're going to get the consumable now?
I don't know. I don't know. I think if the cruisers get it, I don't think it's a big deal. But if the destroyers do, that's a big deal.
Actually, 5.5 kilometer at tier 4? That's more than the concealment range of the Kamikaze.
I know. I'm aware. That's pretty ridiculous. So I don't know. It does feel like, so we were talking about vision control, and these are things that are going against the vision control towards modules that, because remember, hydro lasts for 2 minutes, a minute or a minute and a half or 2 minutes. You're not talking about short-term durations here for these things. So when it's up, it's going to be up for a long time. So I think it's really going to change the balance of the German destroyers.
I think so too, but I like it because while hydro might last for a long time, the range is short enough that it's not. You can play around that. Sometimes. So when I played carriers, the way I thought about the map is that when you're in a ship, what makes up the map is the islands and then enemy ships. if you're playing a carrier, what you don't have to care about islands, because islands basically don't exist, because the planes will automatically fly over the islands. But instead, your islands will be the very strong, anti-air cruisers like a Des Moines or a Minotaur. So you'll have like an 8.6 kilometer radius bubble that you either don't want to fly into, or basically you want to fly into for as little time as possible. Those are the islands. But for a destroyer, the same thing happens with radar. But the problem is that when you have radars that have radiuses of 11.7 kilometers, the issue is that it's very easy to cover such a large area of the map that the destroyer just can't approach something. On the other hand, hydroacoustic search is nowhere near as bad, because having a 6 kilometer radius is a much, much smaller surface area than 11.7.
No doubt of that. That actually kind of brings us into talking about some of the new ships, which is what I want to get into here for the rest of the podcast. So we do have 5 new ships to talk about, 1 cruiser and 4 battleships. And bear in mind that these ships are a work in progress, and these are our first impressions about these ships. So first up, we have USS Wichita, which is a unique heavy cruiser from the U.S. Navy. She was essentially a Brooklyn-class hull with the guns of a New Orleans-class cruiser. If you don't know about Brooklyn-class, the Boise, / Nueve de Julio, was a Brooklyn-class ship. So what does this mean for the ship in game? She has excellent concealment, 8.7 kilometers fully kitted out with an 8.5 kilometer radar. This makes her an effective destroyer hunter and cap zone harassment ship, and something that she can even perform in open water if necessary. While her armor isn't amazing, her maneuverability and her concealment really do make her stand out for me in terms of a heavy cruiser with these abilities. So we get back into the vision control conversation that we were having before, Arun. Most of the vision control ships that have the radar that equals their concealment have been light cruisers in the past. How does a heavy cruiser with the same ability change the balance?
Is it really a heavy cruiser? I mean, I understand the actual classification, but if you look at like the stats of the ship, she's fairly fast for a cruiser, and she seems to be fairly maneuverable too. So I think she'll play a lot more like the Cleveland than... actually, the Cleveland plays kind of like a heavy cruiser, to be honest. But I think she'll play kind of like that. And I don't think this is going to make much of a difference in the vision game, because it doesn't really matter that much if... In fact, it's better if the vision or the cruiser that spots you is a heavy cruiser rather than a light cruiser, because heavy cruisers tend to have less damage per minute.
Her shells did seem to hurt, with the HE shells, did seem to hurt the destroyers pretty badly. Yeah, you have to be a little more accurate, but it's really back to, do you prefer alpha damage or do you prefer fast firing?
Have you seen her armor scheme, though?
Yeah, it's not great. But
Wait, really?
At the same time...
I meant like where the Citadel is. Basically, the Citadel, the only part that's slightly above the waterline is like straight in the middle under the smokestacks. Under the turrets, the Citadel sits much, much lower in the water. And
Citadel-wise, I wasn't taking a lot of Citadel damage in her. What I was taking a lot of
normal penetrations,
full normal penetrations, because it really didn't matter what angle I was at. The battleship's going to be able to do full penetration damage to your ship.
Wait, really? That's actually something else I wanted to mention. So you see, this one is actually slightly different. Because she has the normal armor as like the Des Moines does. So it's 27 millimeters. And this means that if you face up against 380 millimeter caliber AP or guns, it'll actually, they can't overmatch you. And I think that's going to be nice.
But at tier 8, you're going to be up tier. When you're top tier, I totally agree. She's going to be very, very survivable. But you're going to be playing this ship a lot against tier 10s. It's tier 8. We get tiered up a lot at tier 8 right now. So, the ships that you have to worry about are the 406 millimeter, the 420 millimeter, or the 460 millimeter guns on Musashi and Yamato. Those are the guns that were doing the damage no matter what I was able to do. So those are the ones that I worry about, not the 15 inch guns that aren't going to be able to pen me.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the story of every other tier 8 ship, though.
I mean, I agree. I'm just saying that you're not going to go out there and think, oh, she's a heavy cruiser, she's going to be survivable. That's what I'm saying.
Well, it depends on the match, though. If you're a tier 6 to 8 match, it might very well end up being very, very survivable.
Oh, agreed. Yeah, I mean, you really have to be. This is we have to go back to. You need to be aware of the limitations of your armor, and you and I and strangers and the people in ZR and the people in Omni, those people all understand the intricacies and the mechanics of the way the game works. But the average player, the one that makes up the majority of the people in random battles, doesn't understand that 27 millimeters of bow armor means that a 380 millimeter shell doesn't overmatch it. So how do you balance the game? Do you balance it for that average guy, or do you balance it for, the Omni guys and you and me?
You balance it for the Omni guys because it means that the average guy can learn and improve on the game, and the game will still try to be balanced. Whereas if you do it the other way around, it might end up, causing the game to be balanced in a lopsided way for the people at the top, which means that once the average guy gets better, that bad balancing is going to affect them too.
Fair enough. So, I don't know if Wichita is going to stay the way she is right now. And the concealment expert thing, captain skill, that may change the way that this ship plays completely. And honestly, if it does, I really feel like that it would make her be not very good. Her concealment and maneuverability are really the things that made it play in an engaging manner for me. But next up, we have Prince Eitel Friedrich, which was designed and partially constructed as a Mackensen class battlecruiser. The PEF is a World War I designed German battlecruiser with heavy armor, high speed, 28 knots, and 350 millimeter, which is 13.8 inch guns. She was intended to be a cruiser killer with battleship armor and cruiser speed, and is the culmination of German battlecruiser philosophy, which was in opposition to the Royal Navy battlecruiser philosophy. In game, she plays as a balanced tier 6 ship, albeit with less punch than you might expect from a battleship of her tier. I found her to be comfortable to play, but it just wasn't inspiring, Aaron. Like, you don't have, it didn't feel punchy. I sailed around a lot, I bounced a lot of shells, but it didn't do the damage. So is gameplay like that, it feels like it's a very safe, newbie-friendly ship. Is gameplay like that important to be included in World of Warships, or should there be more things that have more balanced advantages and disadvantages?
Well, I think it's good if we have some ships like this, because especially at this kind of tier, which is tier 6. So I think it's completely okay to have ships like that, because we already have choice for ships that have very large drawbacks, but can perform a role very well. For example, I would argue that the Warspite would fall into that category. So if you have both of them, I think that's better for everyone.
Now, we should note that Prince Eitel Friedrich is actually pretty close to release, and isn't anticipated to change a great deal. It's interesting because, the philosophy change between the two navies, between the German Navy in World War I and the Royal Navy in World War I. We have the German battlecruisers to some degree, but we haven't really been allowed to have very many of the Royal Navy battlecruisers, because I think that they would end up being pretty poorly balanced. So maybe you're right. Maybe, having something like this in the game is a good idea. I have a hard time getting excited to play it. Like, okay, I'm going to go out there and I don't care which way my ship's pointed. I'm just going to go around and shoot some guns and stuff. Maybe I'll do some damage, but I'm not going to do, massive overwhelming hits. That kind of gameplay for me is not fun. I don't need another ship like that. I don't need to play another ship like Bayern or things along that line. So I don't know. That's just me.
Yeah, but people like playing the Conquerors, so this is something for them, maybe.
Yeah, I agree. It is. I just, and I at no point do I think that she's going to be overpowered at tier 6 or anything. She's actually really well balanced. It's boring. It's just boring. And I couldn't get over that. But anyway, a ship that I did not find boring and is also at tier 6 is the West Virginia 1941, and which is the iteration of USS West Virginia as she lay at anchor in Pearl Harbor on the morning of December 7th, 1941. One of the Big Seven 16-inch gun ships from before the Washington Naval Treaty, she was the epitome of pre-carrier aviation Mahanian naval doctrine. There was an outcry from the community when we heard that we wouldn't see West Virginia in her late post-war refit form. Yet all of that really faded away for me when I actually played the ship at tier 6. Her guns are still good, maybe not quite as up to the level of Colorado accuracy, but still good enough to punch out cruisers and hurt battleships from a distance. Assuming the way she stays the way that she is, she'll be much more viable than her tier 6 premium 16-inch gun battleship Mutsu, which we have had in the past, and which, honestly, the Achilles heel of Mutsu is that her armor is just crummy. Whereas here, West Virginia does kind of keep that standard battleship dreadnought-y type of turtleback armor that we see in the New Mexico and the Arizona and Colorado in the game. So is something that's kind of this powerful at tier 6, the same tier where we just talked about that Prince Idle Feeder is kind of boring. Is that a good addition to the game, Arun, or do we want to, or should they be kind of a little more careful about down tiering West Virginia in this manner?
Well, I think if both ships end up performing or not performing, if both ships end up being more or less balanced, I think it's completely okay because it simply gives people more choice. I absolutely don't see any problems with it.
So I know that you haven't had a chance to play West Virginia, but I assume that you've played a decent amount of Colorado games, correct?
Oh, yeah.
So imagine Colorado at tier 6 facing, in a situation where it doesn't have to face other tier 7s, with its only handicap being a 1.8 Sigma instead of a 1.9 Sigma, and basically no AA. She might as well be buck naked if you've got a carrier in the game. But other than that, she's a Colorado. Is that too powerful?
So you see, I don't know if it's too powerful because no anti-air at tier 6 is a major drawback because there's almost always going to be a carrier at that tier. It might not be a tier 6 carrier, it might be a tier 5-1, but there's almost always going to be a carrier because, often you'll even have double carriers at that tier. And so that can be a major drawback, I think. But as to imagining playing a ship like that, so you see, the second line of ship, I tried to get to tier 10 after the game launched, was the American battleships. Now, I had played in the beta, so I knew what I was into already. And
but Colorado at that point was not very good.
So,
Colorado was garbage at that time.
So what I'd like to say is that back then, we didn't get quite as much XP as we do now. We didn't have all these special flags, or at least nowhere near as much, or camos and stuff like that. And so the grind was a lot longer. And I did make a video at one point where I was playing the Colorado and I was playing Kantai Collection at the exact same time because it was so boring. Because the ship is slow and it's not like it has a lot of range either. So you just didn't have enough things to do. And I'm afraid that the ship probably isn't going to be much of an improvement over that because it still seems to be 21 knots and still has less than 18 kilometer range, as opposed to like a Fusa that you can start firing at the enemies from over 20 kilometers away. The Fusa is also faster, so I still have my doubts about how much fun the ship would be to play.
It definitely is one of those you have to think ahead a lot and play and put yourself in positions where you're going to be able to shoot at stuff, because if you don't, you're just going to be sailing around by yourself all the time. So I do agree with that. But those guns, man, when you do have something to shoot at, they know they've been kissed. So last up, we have 2 Royal Navy battleships. The first dreadnought ever built, Dreadnought herself, and the last Royal Navy battleship ever built, Vanguard. Both are disappointing in game, frankly. In Dreadnought's case, I feel like it really had more to do with her tier 3 status, which is just not great for battleships in general. But Vanguard has more serious issues. Vanguard's history is a bit of a weird one. Keen observers will note that she has the hull of a Lion-class battleship, and indeed she was intended to become a Lion-class battleship. But the construction of the new heavy guns for the Lions was delayed, and she was modified on the building ways to use leftover 15-inch gun turrets from storage, where they'd been since their removal from the Royal Navy battlecruisers they turned into aircraft carriers. Think Furious, Glorious, etc., etc. This makes her design a problem for World of Warships. She essentially has the same guns as Queen Elizabeth and Warspite, but an AA suite designed for late war aircraft attack and the speed of a late war fast battleship. The result is a mess of a ship at Tier 8 that can't fight anything that she really faces when up tiered, and is more of a floating AA battery than anything else. So, Aaron, what do you think are the next steps for Vanguard? I mean, how do you balance the guns from Tier 6 on a Tier 8 battleship? Some people have talked about down-tiering Vanguard to Tier 7 to get her in a better place and knocking back her AA kind of unhistorically. So how do you balance something like this that just absolutely cannot do anything at Tier 8?
I don't know, just keep it as it is. Kind of reminds me of the Hood that, in my opinion, can't really do all that much at Tier 7, but it still has that apparently strong anti-air at very close range. But overall, the Hood just does not seem to perform exceptionally well at Tier 7. So if we go, based on that example, I guess we just keep it as it is. Ideally, though, I would like it to be changed. Personally, I wouldn't even be opposed if both of them got down-tiered by one tier. Perhaps more the Vanguard than the Hood, from what I've seen that other people have really complained about that ship. It seemed that her armor was fairly lacking as well.
It's not that her armor is that bad. It's just that people are, she's essentially a Lion-class ship, right? And people that play Lion-class ships bank on the fact that they have the super heel, and Vanguard doesn't get the super heel. It just has the regular Tier 8 heel that Monarch gets. And that's one of the reasons that Monarch is such a crummy ship, is that it doesn't get the super heel, and its guns, its 15-inch guns, which it has one more of, then they fire a higher velocity than the Vanguard guns do. So, Tier 8 is such a bad tier for these Royal Navy ships that I don't know what to do anymore, man.
Well, why can't they just give her the super heel then, though? Because, Nelson has it.
That's one of the things that they've talked about, that has been suggested is, either down tier her to Tier 7 or keep her at Tier 8 and increase her gun velocity to reflect supercharges, which is one of the things that I think they should do. Play around with her AP timer, AP fuses, because right now she's got the crummy 0.1 second or 0.01 second AP fuses. So they're good at doing damage to relatively unarmored ships, but if they have a bunch of armor, they don't do a lot. And the other one is, exactly what you said, give her the super heel. So I think that there are a lot of options out there for things to possibly do with Vanguard, but this iteration is just miserable.
I just checked out her armor scheme. Is that like the biggest citadel any battleship has that it goes to any ship? Because I think even Yamato has less of a citadel on the side available to shoot at than the ship does.
I don't know. It's pretty big. It's a big old breadbasket.
I initially thought that red blotch was all like the, what do you call it? Just normal plates. And then I click around, and I'm like, wait, where's the citadel? I can't see it. And then it dawned on me that all that big blotch, that basically like the entire side of the ship, is the citadel.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know where they're going to go with Vanguard. I think that they don't know where they're going to go with Vanguard yet. But it needs something, man. Like it's in a bad spot right now.
I definitely would not put that ship in the Vanguard.
Oh, the good old air room puns are back. Yay. Well, I think that's about all we had for this week. Aaron, did you have anything else that we needed to throw in?
Nope, not really.
Alrighty. Well, we will see you guys next week. As always, follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Warships Podcast and Twitter at Warships Podcast for updates between episodes. Aaron, you're doing some Twitch streaming as well right now, right?
Am I?
Oh, are you? I don't know.
No,
I'm asking.
Right now, no. But I plan to actually. I'm just surprised because I've literally not told anyone.
Oh, well, hey, this is me guessing. I have no idea. So we, of course, want to thank our amazing Patreon backers. If you're interested in supporting us, please consider becoming a Patreon backer yourself. We do appreciate even $1 an episode. That does help us out in producing the episodes. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you next week.